Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. We are crossing into Oregon, and a few years ago, the Oregon Department of Transportation did a study and found that Highway 395 is the least traveled highway in Oregon. So over the next few days, we plan to explore Highway 395 from here to Washington and see what Oregon's loneliest road has to offer. Here is the Welcome to California sign, but if we turn around, there's no Oregon sign here. And that brings up a somewhat interesting fact about New Pine Creek. Because of a surveying error, this is the southernmost settlement in Oregon. The 42nd parallel was set as the southern boundary of Oregon back in 1819 in a treaty with Spain. California was part of the Spanish Empire at the time. When a survey was done in 1868, an error of about a half mile caused part of New Pine Creek to be placed in Oregon. The error wasn't discovered until the 1980s, though, and while the states did have talks on it, nothing was changed. The Oregon citizens of New Pine Creek really didn't want to be moved into California. The Oregon part of town has a population of 111, while the California part has a population of 87. Also because of the error, despite being on the state line, New Pine Creek, California is not the northernmost town in the state. But let's say goodbye to California and continue on Oregon's loneliest road. Highway 395 stretches 389 miles across Oregon, giving the state the second longest portion of the route after California. Along the way, it cuts through some of the most remote and sparsely populated country in the United States. The part of Oregon we're going to be traveling through features high desert plateaus, volcanic peaks on the horizon, rivers cutting through wide valleys, and towns so small they can almost slip past before you notice them. Of course, after saying that, with a population of less than 2,500, we are now approaching the biggest town we'll come across for hours. We are now entering the town of Lakeview, which is nicknamed the tallest town in Oregon, as it sits at an elevation of 4,802 feet. In 1869, a man named M.W. Bullard settled here at the northern end of the Goose Lake Valley, and his settlement became the town of Lakeview, officially taking the name in 1876. Across the street is the Odd Fellows building. This dates back to 1911, and the upper floor used to be a lodge hall, but now the building is occupied by a church. Native Americans occupied this area around Lakeview as early as 14,000 years ago, but the modern history of the town began in the 1860s, when the Army created a camp in the area during what was known as the Snake War. And I'm not sure what these bells are for. There's no sign or marker for them, but it looks like they were made in Baltimore in 1906. But the Snake War was a conflict between local Native American tribes and American settlers moving into the area. And this is the Lake County Veterans Memorial. The plaque on the front here honors Lake County residents killed in World War I and World War II. And this side honors residents killed in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And this side, the more recent Gulf Wars. Across the street is the Algier Theater, built in 1940. I'm not sure if movies are still being shown here or not. And here's an old wagon, one that they do not want you climbing on, apparently. This is the Harryford building. This was built in 1913, and the second floor was once the meeting space for the Elks Club. On May 22nd, 1900, there was a fire that burned down most of the town. There were no deaths, but 64 buildings were destroyed. Nowadays, the town does have the toughest Safeway grocery store around, though. We are a little bit north of town now, at a place called Hunter's Hot Springs, the home of a geyser named Old Perpetual. And I'm not exactly sure where the geyser is, but this claims to be Oregon's only geyser, and also the only one in the Pacific Northwest. Apparently it can shoot 200-degree water over 60 feet into the air, so I don't think we'll miss it, but even if we do, it's supposed to go off every 90 seconds to 2 minutes. There's a sign up ahead, so we have to be going the right way. Now this is a real geyser, but it didn't first appear naturally. They tried drilling a well here in 1923, thus accidentally creating the geyser. Though I guess in drought years it doesn't go off as often and could go weeks without an eruption. So let's hope it's back on the 90-second schedule. Otherwise, we're going to be walking around here for a while. So this should be it right in front of us. Right where that thing is sticking out of the water. Of course, with our luck, it might be over here and we'll be facing the wrong way when it goes off. But I think it should be right over here. And here it goes. And that's it. What? Alright, we're waiting for this thing to go off again. When I read that it shoots 60 feet into the air, I was expecting a little bit more than what we got. I mean, I wasn't expecting Old Faithful, but maybe something a little more impressive. But I guess when you're the only geyser in the state... Oh, here it goes. Now that's more of what I was expecting. So that was Old Perpetual, apparently Oregon's only geyser, and I'd say it's worth 5 minutes of your time if you're passing by. Part of Highway 395 in California, where it used to overlap Highway 6, is designated as the Grand Army of the Republic Highway, honoring Union Civil War veterans. Well, the entire length of Highway 395 in Oregon was dedicated as the World War I Veterans Memorial Highway in 2015. The reputation of Highway 395 through here being Oregon's loneliest road is well deserved. It's said that on average, only about 400 cars per day in total travel on the highway in the section between Lakeview and Burns, a distance of about 140 miles. We are now approaching what may be one of the most incredible sights on the highway. Not just in Oregon, but along the entire length of Highway 395. Lake Abert is a shallow lake that is left over from a much larger lake that was around during the last ice age. Despite its size, something like 15 miles long and 7 miles wide, it's only 11 feet deep at its deepest. Because the lake has no outflow, The water is very saline and alkaline. Fish can't survive in these conditions, but brine shrimp thrive, making this a very popular stop for birds. But as cool as this lake is, if we just take a look to our right, there's something even more incredible. This is the Abert Rim. At 2,490 feet above us, this is one of the highest fault scarps in the United States, and it is also the longest exposed fault scarp in North America. The top 800 feet or so is a sheer basalt cliff. With the Abert Rim on your side like this, the road through here almost makes you feel like you're on the coast. I'm not even sure the camera does it justice, how massive this thing is. Looking up at the Abert Rim, there are quite a few basalt boulders everywhere, and some of them are pretty large. Let's cross the road real quick. We'll keep our eyes out for cars, but I don't think we've seen one pass by since we've stopped. And quite a few massive boulders all the way down here, too. Every so often, one ends up on the highway. We'll be driving alongside the lake for the next 15 miles or so. Both the rim and the lake were named in 1843 during the Fremont expedition through the area for Colonel John James Abert, Fremont's commanding officer. The first two counties in Oregon that we're passing through, Lake County and Harney County, have a combined population of about 15,000 people. Harney County is the 10th largest county in the United States by area, but has only a little over 7,000 people, about 3/4 of a person per square mile. In this area, cattle outnumber people 14 to 1. And to be honest, we haven't even seen that many cows. Since this area is signed as open range, if you happen to hit a cow in the road, you'll be charged for it. And it's not cheap either. I guess you can say the stakes are high. I suspect that when most people think of the Great Basin, Oregon probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind. But about a quarter of the state lies within it. We've just stopped at the Northern Great Basin Experimental Range. This experimental range is over 16,000 acres in size and is run by Oregon State University and the United States Department of Agriculture. Out here they test different livestock practices, things like how livestock grazing interacts with the desert environment of eastern Oregon, and also things like reseeding practices and soil stability. That is important work and all, but really I just stopped here to admire this wide open landscape. If it wasn't for the highway and a few dirt roads, you'd hardly know anyone had ever been here. Two-thirds of Oregon is east of the Cascade Range, and because of that, it's in what's called a rain shadow, meaning it gets very little rain, only about 12 inches a year. As we start to get closer to Burns, we are starting to see a few more trees though, and tomorrow the landscape is going to change dramatically. But I don't think the number of cars on the road will change that much. This might be the first billboard we've seen in over 100 miles. After about 130 miles with almost no towns and very few other cars, we've arrived in Burns, which is pretty much a major outpost in the middle of nowhere. With about 2,700 people, it doesn't sound like much, but out here, this is the big city. We are walking through downtown on Broadway Avenue, which is also Highway 395. And this building dates back to the 1890s. The last digit is missing, so I don't know the exact year. Some towns have historical plaques on the buildings giving more information, but it doesn't look like Burns does. Even here in downtown, there isn't that many cars on the road. Burns was established in the 1880s and was named after the Scottish poet Robert Burns. Like so many towns out here, it grew up around cattle ranching. By the 1920s, lumber was the big industry, and I know that is pretty surprising from the terrain we've seen so far, but as we'll see later, there is a lot of forest around here. I think this is the most cars I've seen passing by all day. I really love walking around downtowns and these small towns because there is just so much personality. When you imagine a classic American small town, these towns still look like that. Across the street is the Federal Building and Post Office, built in 1940. This is the Palace Cafe and Lounge, built in 1930, and we actually ate dinner at the taco truck in their parking lot tonight. And this is the Desert Theater, built in 1949, and as always, I'm glad to see they're still showing movies there. And this is the historic Central Hotel, built in 1929, and where we'll be staying tonight. And since there's no one else around right now, let's do a quick tour of the hotel. I'm trying to avoid filming other guests. But this is pretty cool. They have a calendar here that's still set on January 1929. And this is the lobby area. There's no attendant on duty. They send you a code by email that you use to access the rooms. You don't need these keys. And I thought that was pretty futuristic for a hotel built in 1929. Now, there are no elevators here since this is an old hotel. You do have to take the stairs. And the stairs are quite creaky. And we have a skylight here letting in natural light. And even though this is an old hotel, unlike a lot of similar places, I haven't heard any ghost stories about this place. No legends about it being haunted, as far as I know anyway. And this is our room here. They don't have room numbers. Our room is Swanky Diggs. And instead of a key, we have a code to get into the room. So I'll punch in the code real quick. And this is our room for the night. So the hotel was originally built in 1929, but it was purchased by the Keedy family in 2016 after it had been sitting empty for over 20 years, and they completely renovated the place, and I think it looks amazing. We paid $169 for the room, and we picked this room because it had a private bathroom. Some of the rooms don't. When the hotel was built, it only had 2 toilets and 2 bathtubs. And can you imagine being the last person of the night to use the bathtub? These days, 7 of the 12 rooms have their own bathroom. And here is our view. We'll have to take a look at this at night when it's all lit up. It is awesome to see this neon lit up, but it's time for us to head to bed so we can get an early start tomorrow. Okay, so now it's the next day, and we had a great sleep at the historic Central Hotel. If you're ever in Burns, Oregon, I highly recommend this place. But now it's time for us to continue north on what is supposed to be the least traveled highway in Oregon, though I don't know how much less traveled you can get than the section we were on yesterday. We are now in Divine Canyon, and this is what's left of the Divine Monument that was put up here in 1928. It used to include a water fountain and was much taller, but time has taken its toll. This canyon was named for a pioneer cattle rancher named John S. Divine. He had lived in the area from 1868 until his death in 1901. We've gone from the open range to a forest of ponderosa pines now. We are currently traveling through the Malheur National Forest, but we will be back on the plains shortly. I have to say, the scenery in this part of Oregon is incredible. And with so few other cars out here, this is an amazing drive. We've driven Highway 50 through Nevada, which is nicknamed the loneliest road in America, and so far, we've seen a lot less traffic here. This is Seneca, which is often listed as one of the coldest places in Oregon. The state's record low temperature of negative 54 degrees Fahrenheit was set here in February 1933. The town's not very big. You blink and you miss it as you're driving through, but I did notice this Bear Valley Historical Park, so I figured we'd take a look around. This town was founded in 1895, and the postmaster named it for her brother-in-law, who was a prominent Portland judge, Seneca Smith. And there really isn't much to this park. It looks to be a work in progress. Well, there's at least one other visitor here. And some horses too. In the 1920s, this was the northern terminus for the Oregon and Northwestern Railroad, which was owned by the Hines Lumber Company. Ponderosa pine logs would be shipped from here to the Hines sawmill near Burns. There is still an open store here, the only one around for miles. The lumber company ceased operations here in 1984. The most impressive building in town is probably the school. This was built in 1932. After a lot of straight driving across the Great Basin, this section of the road really stands out. We're even coming up on a hairpin turn. We've just reached Canyon City. This is the county seat for Grant County, Oregon. Canyon City was founded in 1862 when gold was found in the area. Initially around 10,000 people flocked here, but by 1870, the population was down to around 250. It's grown slightly since then. It was 660 in the 2020 census. The Grant County Historical Museum is actually open, so we'll take a quick look around. We've had pretty bad luck with getting to local museums on days they are closed on this trip, so it's nice to finally get to check one out. And wow, does this one have a lot of stuff. There is so much here, and there is just room after room. You could easily spend a day looking around this place. Poor A. Schmidt. I mean, I guess they're lucky that their wooden grave marker was actually saved and not lost to time. But now it sits right next to the men's room. These museums are always a great way to learn about the local area, and the exhibits they have are always so wild. Like, here's a little section just on two-headed cows. Like I said, I could easily spend all day here, but we still have a lot of ground to cover, so unfortunately, we have to get back on the road. We are passing through the town of John Day, and we're going to take a slight detour off Highway 395 for a bit. There are quite a few things in the area named for John Day, such as the John Day River, John Day Fossil Beds National Monument, and two towns, Dayville, and of course, this town, the town of John Day. John Day, however, never set foot in this area. Day was a hunter employed by the Pacific Fur Company, and in 1811, he was a member of an overland expedition that was traveling from Missouri to Fort Astoria on the Pacific Ocean. During the journey, Day and another member, Ramsey Crooks, fell behind the group due to illness. When they continued on the journey a few days later, as they were traveling along the Columbia River, a little more than 100 miles from here, the two men were robbed and stripped naked by Native Americans. This was apparently in revenge for some members of the fur company killing some of the natives, so really Day and Crooks got off easy. Day and Crooks had to wander across the wilderness of Oregon naked. They were kind of the first contestants on Naked and Afraid, I guess, until they were eventually rescued. Where the robbery happened is where the John Day River meets the Columbia River, and members of the fur company began referring to it as John Day's River, and the name stuck. But the river cuts through this area, and it's the largest undammed river in Oregon, so there's a lot of stuff named after the river. And speaking of John Day, we are now at John Day Fossil Beds National Monument, and this is the Mascall Overlook. Right in front of us is Picture Gorge, and that mountain sticking up in the middle is Sheep Rock. The National Monument has 3 separate sections. Today we'll be visiting what's called the Sheep Rock Unit, which is pretty much the heart of the park. Here is the John Day River. This river cut through the rock here and formed Picture Gorge over countless years. Unfortunately, you can't stop anywhere in Picture Gorge, so we'll just have to talk about it as we drive through. Now, I don't know a lot about geology, so I'm just going off of the National Park Service's website here, but picture Gourd is made up of layers of flood basalts. 16 million years ago, there were 61 sporadic lava flows that erupted, on average every 15,000 years, that created this. Then, over time, the river cut through the rock and made this gorge. And this thing really makes for a dramatic entrance into the park. This part of the park is also where we'll find the fossil beds the park gets its name from. This is the Thomas Condon Paleontology Center. It showcases fossils of rhinos, camels, and saber-tooth-like predators that once roamed these valleys. This is actually the second time I've visited this park, and this is the second time the Paleontology Center was closed when I visited. And there's Sheep Rock on the other side of the valley. I don't know, when I look at this, I don't really see a sheep. The landscape here is pretty incredible, though. It looks like everything's been turned slightly to the side. This became a national monument in 1975, but it looks like it was registered as a natural landmark in 1966. We're kind of across the street from the Paleontology Center now, and this is the James Cant Ranch. James Cant arrived in eastern Oregon in 1905 as part of a wave of Scottish migrants that settled in this valley during that time. In 1910, he purchased this land and built this ranch. This house was built sometime between 1915 and 1918. Let's take a quick walk around the ranch, see if we can walk down to the river. And there's an apple tree here. There's a sign that says you can pick the fruit if you want, just don't climb the trees. But these don't actually look ripe right now. Prior to Cant owning this land, it was owned by Floyd Officer, who homesteaded here. And this ranch is in the shadow of Sheep Rock. Officer ended up selling the land to James Cant in 1910 because he wanted to move to town so that his kids could go to school. And there is some old farm equipment here. The scenery out here is incredible, but it is hot right now, and the winters are brutal. Having a ranch out here in the early 1900s was not an easy life. The Cant family ended up selling this land to the National Park Service in 1975. When the Park Service purchased this property, they also acquired its water rights. And you can see one of the irrigation ditches right here. And it doesn't have much in the way of water in it right now, but it's greener than everything else. The National Park Service still leases out 4 fields of irrigated land for hay production in an effort to preserve the historic use and appearance of the fields, though it doesn't look like any of them are in use right now. And we are just about at the river, and the mosquitoes are extremely happy that I decided to take this walk. I don't think they've eaten for a while. And here's the John Day River again. Now let's head downstream a few miles and check out the fossil beds. So we've stopped at a place called Blue Basin, and it doesn't look very blue yet, but it will once we get a little bit further down the trail. We're walking through what looks like dry desert country, but if you roll the clock back about 44 million years, this was a lush, subtropical paradise. Imagine thick forests filled with more than 175 kinds of nut and fruit trees, buzzing with insects and birds, and crawling with creatures that feel like they came straight out of a storybook. There were tiny three-toed horses darting through the underbrush, crocodiles covered in armor plates, the very first land tortoises, and even giant predators that looked like cats, but weren't cats at all. We're starting to see some of that blue now. So as the ages passed, the world changed. The climate cooled and floods swept through these valleys, washing animals into a natural quarry. Then came the ash and pumice from the growing Cascade volcanoes, burying entire forests and locking those bones away for scientists to find millions of years later. In the 1800s, an Irish immigrant named Thomas Condon, the same Thomas Condon the Paleontology Center is named for, began digging up fossils here, making some pretty incredible discoveries. He was even named Oregon's first state geologist. And speaking of fossils, here is a replica of a tortoiseshell fossil. I'm not sure how well this can be seen with the reflection. And there's probably still fossils hiding out here. This is such a great fossil location because it kept getting buried because of volcanoes. After the subtropical forests were buried, this eventually became grasslands and sagebrush, with herds of camels, elephants, and giant sloths. Then about 7 million years ago, a volcano near where Burns is today exploded with unimaginable force, sending fire and ash across 13,000 square miles and wiping the slate clean once again. And something tells me we've reached the end of the trail. So this is the Blue Basin, the fossil bed where the park gets its name from. Hopefully the blue color is showing up good on the camera. I have a feeling this might be one of those places that looks a lot better in person than it does on video. But it's time to turn around and continue on our way through Oregon on Highway 395. We've backtracked and we're back heading north on Highway 395, which you could probably tell by the lack of cars on the road again. Google Maps has this listed as the Beech Creek stage station, though I've been unable to find any record of it. As far as the settlement of Beech Creek goes, the post office was established on January 26, 1900, and James T. Berry was the first postmaster. The post office closed in 1955. And I don't think this was a stage station. This was probably just an old ranch. Whatever it was, there's not much left of this building. The old house looks pretty cool though. I wish I had more information on it. I also wish we could get over there and take a closer look. We've now traveled over 250 miles of Highway 395 through Oregon so far, and it's crazy how it's remained so empty pretty much the entire way. Even when we travel through the rare small town, we still don't see any people. This is the town of Fox. Now we'll be driving through the Umatilla National Forest. It looks like we've made it to the 45th parallel. We're now halfway between the equator and the North Pole. We're not driving quite that far, though. And there are a lot of mosquitoes here at the 45th parallel. I'm going to get back in the car and get out of here. This is Battle Mountain State Park. This mountain gets its name as the decisive battle of what was called the Bannock War was fought here. This was the last major Native American uprising in the Pacific Northwest. The battle took place on July 8, 1878. The uprising was started by Bannock Indians, but Pony Blanket, a northern Paiute, inherited command. He led Paiutes, Bannocks, and Snakes on a wide sweep out of Idaho, through eastern Oregon, and into the Blue Mountains. But United States Army troops, under the command of General Oliver O. Howard, defeated him here, and a few days later, a Umatilla scout working for the Army beheaded him, ending the Bannock War. All the drinking fountains and the fireplace here at the park were built in 1935 by the Civilian Conservation Corps. One thing you won't find here, though, is the story behind the park's name. There's not a single sign or marker explaining the battle or what happened here. The history is forgotten, only remembered in the name itself. We're just approaching Pendleton, and it looks like we got here just in time for a fire. Pendleton is a true cowboy town, and we even have these statues greeting us on our way into town. This is called the Cattle Drive. If you've heard the name Pendleton before, chances are you're thinking of the famous wool shirts and blankets. This is the town they're named for. Pendleton was also on the Oregon Trail. In 1851, settlers built a trading post at the confluence of Beech Creek and the Umatilla River, and by 1868, the new town was officially named Pendleton, after a vice presidential candidate of all things. This is the old train station. It's now a museum, one that's of course closed. The arrival of the railroad in the 1880s turned Pendleton into a booming hub. This little frontier outpost quickly became one of Oregon's biggest cities, fueled by agriculture, cattle, and the wool trade. And out of that wool trade in 1909 came the Pendleton Woolen Mills, which is still producing blankets and shirts that are known worldwide. And if you've ever seen those blankets, they are pretty pricey. Let's take a look around downtown. It's a little late, so not much is open, but I'm mostly interested in seeing the historic buildings anyway. This is the Working Girls Hotel. This was built in the late 1890s and was a bordello up until the 1950s. It's been remodeled, and now it's a hotel. Unfortunately, it's not where we're staying tonight. We'll be at the Hampton Inn. There are also statues up and down the street of important people in Pendleton's history. According to the sign, this is Madame Stella Darby. You have to be careful walking around here. You never know when you might come across a historic sidewalk. I should also mention that long before settlers arrived in the area, this was the homeland of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes. In 1855, they signed a treaty with the United States government, forming the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. There are tunnels underneath the sidewalk, and there is an underground tour. Unfortunately, we're too late for it. But it gives us a reason to come back because it sounds really cool. There are a lot of cool old buildings here, but I'm actually looking for something. My great-grandfather came here for the Pendleton Roundup in 1937, and I know this because I have a box of negatives of photos he took, and I was hoping to try and recreate one of his photos while walking around down here. Of course, not all of the buildings are the same, and the lens on this camera is a little different, but I think this will be pretty close. This building that looks like a castle was built in 1905 by a photographer named W.S. Bowman. He built it as his studio as well as retail and residential space. And it sits right on the Umatilla River. Pendleton's real claim to fame is probably its rodeo. In 1910, the community launched the first Pendleton Roundup, a wild frontier show that's grown into one of the largest rodeos in the world. Every September, it brings in about 50,000 people to Pendleton. The slogan for the Pendleton Roundup is, "Let her buck." From tribal heritage to railroads, wool, and rodeo legends, Pendleton isn't just a stop on the Oregon Trail. It's a town that helped define the spirit of the American West. This part of Highway 395 overlaps with Interstate 84, And as far as interstates go, this isn't too crowded, but it feels like big city rush hour compared to the empty highway we've had through Oregon up to this point. I've seen more cars driving on the road in the last 10 minutes than I did in the last few days, probably. We only have about 30 miles until we reach the Columbia River and the Washington state line. There may not be as much to do on this section of Highway 395 as there is in California, but I think the highway through Oregon is all about the drive. I think the scenery through Oregon has been incredible, and from the California state line, almost until you reach Pendleton, there are so few cars on the road with you, it feels like you have the highway to yourself. To me, Highway 395 in Oregon is a fantastic road trip. There is the Columbia River below us, and the bridge that will take us into Washington. Lewis and Clark even came through here on their expedition to the Pacific and wrote about this area. Of course, it looks a lot different today with the McNary Dam here. Construction on this dam began in 1947, and it opened in 1954. But let's try to head down to the river and say our goodbyes to Oregon. Here is the Umatilla Bridge, though it's actually two bridges. The southbound bridge opened in 1955, and the northbound bridge was built in 1988. And across the water is Washington. We are now on the banks of the Columbia River, and so that ends our journey on Highway 395 in Oregon, which definitely deserves its title as Oregon's loneliest road. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.